Today, I'm joined by Ginger Howell from the Hazelden Betty Ford Graduate School of Addiction Studies. She's an instructional designer, a very talented one, and she's been involved in helping them kind of build all of their online courses and their online program from the ground up. We get into all kinds of interesting topics related to building and teaching online courses through Populi. So we get into making courses predictable, accessibility, course review, outcomes assessment, all kinds of stuff. And she's even going to take us through one of their courses, show us their setup. If you're an instructor or an admin that is involved with online courses at all, this is really helpful. So enjoy. Well, I know a lot of people know about Hazelden, but maybe you could give a little bit of background on Hazelden so people know, about the school and then the work they're doing up there, and then maybe just a little bit of background on yourself, and then we can kind of talk about instructional design.
Yeah, absolutely. So Hazelden has been around since the 1950s or so.
Yeah.
It started out treating people with addictions, alcohol and drug addictions. We're both inpatient and outpatient clinics. And we started in Center City, and then we just expanded from there. We have, I think, 4 clinics in Minnesota, and then I'm going to guess, I think there's 14 across the United States right now. And then about 20 years ago, they saw a need to start educating people on how to treat addictions, because it's a whole different animal than treating people for psychological and emotional disorders. So they saw a need to start a graduate school that teaches counselors how to, like with addiction studies, and how to treat those addictions. And then about 5 years ago, we launched our online program. And then 4 years ago, we have merged with Betty Ford. So now we're the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation. And in the foundation is the graduate school. We're a fairly small school. Don't ask me how many people are in it because I should have asked earlier. But we're fairly small. Our online program has really taken off, and we are continually getting bigger numbers as the years go on. So I feel like that's been very, very successful in terms of schooling. So as far as me, I am I work out of Arkansas, even though the graduate school is in Center City, Minnesota. I have been with the graduate school for about 5 years. My background started in early childhood education. I earned my BA at a local school here, and taught for about 5 years in early childhood, so second grade and kindergarten mainly. And then I decided to get my master's in teaching, and then another master's in educational technology. And then I thought, might as well keep going. So I earned my Ph.D. in instructional design with an emphasis of online learning at Capella. So I have had that for nearly 6 years now. And then I started working for Hazelden Betty Ford. And my job duties, I mean, they're all over the place, but I am their instructional designer. So I work with all kinds of different people that know their content really, really well. And I design all their online courses with them. I also help them manage their courses, update their courses every term. And we have 3 terms in a year: a summer, spring, and fall, summer, winter, and fall. And I also help manage their support site. I built their support site, manage their support site. I also help troubleshoot any technical issues that they have. And I also train student, faculty, and staff on any educational technology needs that they may have. So that's basically my job in a nutshell.
Well, that's a lot. That'll keep you busy.
They do keep me busy. Yep. My focus lately has been accessibility. So that has been a real big undertaking, but it's been fun and challenging.
As you're talking, I'm like taking notes because there's all these things that I want to come back to and talk about. So that's great. And so for Populi, we've got lots and lots of schools that are starting online programs. They've already got online programs going. Some of them are thinking about starting online programs. And Populi is pretty self-explanatory, but there's still a lot of options when you are deciding how you want to design courses. And so I thought of you, and I thought of Hazelden because you guys have been doing this, you've been doing it well. And I think it'd be helpful for people to be able to see all right, how does Hazelden set up their courses? What's been working? What have they learned? And that gives me a chance to ask questions about what you all are doing. And so maybe to start, what if we pull up the test course that you prepared, and we can kind of walk through, and then that way, as we're talking about things like accessibility and all the support that you're doing, you know, it gives us some context for looking at that. So let's see if we can pull that up. So hit the share button again. All right, I can see it on my end, so that looks great.
Perfect.
So what you've done is you cloned sort of your shell that you use for, so talk about that a little bit. So you basically have a shell set up.
Yes. So what we have done, and we had a previous instructional designer that I think worked about a year before I came on. He was basically our very first. And so I came on, and about 3 weeks later, we launched our online program. So most of the initial work was done by him. And then I just took what he started and then just improved upon it. So what he had developed was that we have a course development shell for every one of our courses. And then we have the current like semester course as well.
Gotcha.
And so that helps us to be able to clone that course into the course development shell and then make updates without disturbing what's going on currently. And then we can clone that into the next coming term. So that one
probably lives in your catalog then as sort of like, all right, this is or you probably have a term. I got you. You have a term set up for, I can see the course development shells term that has fully developed courses in it, but they're not being used for teaching. They're simply being used to say, okay, this is kind of what we want to start with. And then it gets cloned into whatever current term you're working in.
Current. Yeah, that's correct. So here's all our course development shells.
Cool.
And we don't work in those often, but if we're making a huge major update, like I was making a naming structure update or accessibility updates that really just needed a kind of overhaul of the course, and I knew I wouldn't be able to do it between one term and the next,
Absolutely.
I would go ahead and put it in there and work on it because it might take me a few weeks to do one course. So that's where we work on it. And this is where we also build our course when we do course development. And then at the very bottom, we have an empty shell for testing. And quite honestly, I use the course development shells for testing as well. So if there's a specific issue, I just go in there and I do it. So sometimes I use this and sometimes I don't. So
yeah, good. That's great. Well, I point that out because I think some people probably aren't doing that, where they're trying to build courses from scratch, or there's this scramble every term because they add the courses to the term, and then they're like, okay, I got to go in and add my assignments, and I got to go set up my lessons, and so that's a helpful thing to do, to have a separate term set up that you can clone from. So that's great.
Yes, that was developed before I came on, and I'm very thankful for it. So it's been very helpful.
Good. Okay,
right.
So what part do you, in the work that you do, I assume you must work with the instructor, just like they are going to have input on what kind of assignments they want to set up. And so how do you work with the instructor on that?
Development courses?
Yeah. So like when you're deciding how to set up the course for the first time.
Sure. Okay. So we have a series of meetings, and we actually have, see if I can get onto it here from here. It's kind of a secret page that people can't get to, but I can show you all. This is on our support site. I also use our support site to kind of house everything that I need to give people. So that's helpful as well. So a lot of these pages are going to be public for our staff and faculty and our students to get to. And then some of them, because it contains things that we don't want to give out just to everybody, then I kind of just keep that off of the website, but it's still attached. So only I can get onto it unless I get the link. So let me find it here. All right, so when we start developing content, we have a series of meetings beforehand, just for me to kind of get a feel of what the course is about and get a feel for the designer as well. Like, how do they function? Are they more of a linear, or are they more of a kind of a web drawing type of person to get their thoughts out of their heads and on paper? Like, how do they function best? And what is the course about? And what do they envision for the course? Then once I have an idea of that, we talk about the roles of the instructional designer and the developer. And we have this document that just lays it out for them. And then we also have the course development process. And in the course development process, we have 3 phases. And I'll move that over in just a minute to show you. This has been extremely helpful in our course development process. This is something that the previous director and I had developed. The first phase is the backwards design, which is one that we pretty much only use. And this type of design takes the course learning outcomes and keeps them at the front of our thinking. So that's the center. Everything we do kind of goes back to those outcomes to make sure that we're doing what we need to do and we're covering what we need to cover. So the backwards design is our phase 1. It talks about how to complete the backwards design. I also have a worksheet that they fill out to kind of get their thoughts out of their head and onto paper. And then we can connect it to how does it relate to the outcomes to make sure everything just keeps going back to that.
That's great. Absolutely.
And then the next part of that worksheet, they fill in like the measurable learning activities. They fill out the learning strategies, like how are they going to teach it to the students? Are they going to have readings, lectures, videos? What is going to be their big focus? And of course, this evolves as you develop, right. And even after it launches, that will change as well. And as the course just takes off and the instructor is free to really add who they are into the course, that also changes. But we want to just get the foundation of it kind of on paper. Then on phase 2, we have a whole workbook, which basically it takes the exact layout that we have in Populi, because we have a standard layout we use in all of our courses. And that's key to the success of our students, is to have it laid out in the same way. And so in our workbook, it's laid out that way. And then they take what they did in the previous worksheet and just put it in that workbook. Then I go back and I make sure that everything relates to the outcomes. I kind of fiddle with it, make sure that it is consistent with all our other courses in terms of structure. I start adding in accessibility things, and we get it so that the workbook is exactly what it's going to look like in Populi. And then in the third phase is, in phase 2 at the very end, I put it all in Populi for them. I make sure everything's working, make sure everything's just shored up. And then in phase 3, we do a course review, and that's also standard in our class. Before a course is opened up for the term, we do a course review. If it's developed, we do a really big course review to make sure everything is everything is working, all the links work, and everything is up to our standards. Everything measures up to the Quality Matters rubric as well. So it incorporates all of those things into it. So we have a lot of meetings, because it's not like they just fill in the workbook and they give it to me. We keep passing it back and forth to make sure the changes I make doesn't hurt what they have, the goal that they have for that course. Yeah. And so there's a lot of passing back and forth of that. So that's how we really develop a course, with all of their materials that they need, any explanations of how to do the course reviews, any of the templates they might need, like the PowerPoint template that we use for our graduate school is located on here. Any like instructions for assignments, those templates, everything is located here. They can just pull off, because they will have that link, and they use that to create the materials for the class. I
think, that's important. So what you've got is a shared, workspace where you're able to house all the official files and templates that you guys use. So instructors know if they want to develop a PowerPoint for one of their courses, they can go get that template, and everything's right there, and it's going to be consistent. And what you talked about with the predictability of the course for students is really key, because if every instructor is choosing how they want to design their own course, you're going to end up with 20 different formats. And if students taking 3 different courses, they're going to have to learn 3 different formats. Okay, this instructor wants me to go here and do this. This other instructor wants me to do this other thing. And so making it predictable makes a lot of sense. Takes a lot more time and effort up front to decide on that. But I think that seems like that's well worth it in the long run for making it easy for students to know how to, what you expect of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like our students have lower anxiety. I don't know about you, but anytime I start a new class, even teaching it, and I've been doing that for a long time, I have anxiety before the semester starts because we really have fear of the unknown. So if we can take that fear of the unknown and just lower it as low as possible, then our students come in with very low anxiety and they can jump right into the content. They also know where everything is. And we have a orientation course before they start the program. They take this orientation course. It's 4 weeks, and really we orient them to everything. We teach them everything about Populi. We show them this is where the syllabus is in all of your classes. This is where the support site is in all of your classes. This is how you submit assignment. This is how you do this. This is how our instructors usually communicate. And we show them all around the graduate school, like electronically, where we put things electronically, where they can find the handbook, our website, all of that. We just allow them to be exposed to all of that, and they have all of these projects to do to gain experience so that they have low anxiety going into the graduate school. They can also assess too, am I ready for this or not? Am I too overwhelmed in this 4-week course? Maybe this is telling me I'm not ready for this. So it really helps us kind of make sure that our students are prepared, and if they're not, we can get them prepared.
Yeah, and so there's no pressure. They're able to come in and just in a relaxed environment, get to know what it's like to take an online course, maybe their first online course that they've ever taken. The orientation course, then you probably set up in a very similar way to all your other courses. So they're participating in discussions, they're viewing their lessons, learning how to jump from a lesson into a test or whatever the next step is. So is that, okay, can you show us sort of the, what's the structure that you start with, I guess? Is that what we could look at here?
Yeah, I can show you because our structure is the same. Yeah, and everything. And in our orientation course too, we train them on all the technologies that they use. We don't use a whole lot of instructional technologies because we don't want to overwhelm our students, but we have about 3 or 4 that we use consistently, like WebEx, VoiceThread. And we train them in the orientation course. So that kind of also takes out the guessing side of it for students. All right, so for our structure, I'm going to talk about our info tab because to me, this is a huge, big, important piece to our course. And it really does kind of show our structure, especially with our naming structure. Okay, so this is our info tab, and in the info tab, we always have the support and library site. This takes them to the support site that I built for them. There's different tabs, like there's their electronic library. They can access databases. It introduces them to the librarian, how to contact her. Then you have the student support site. It talks about, we have a page for Populi resources. It kind of steps them through some of the things that they might have questions about Populi. And as students ask me questions, that's when our website starts building, because I'm like, oh, if they have a need, then I'm going to make a tutorial for them anyway. Might as well put it on our site for them.
That's great. And this is next level. Like, I don't know many schools that are doing this, but it's so helpful because obviously you've got the Populi knowledge base, but that thing is so chock full of things for all types of users, that this really focuses it in on, all right, this is for your faculty, for your students. And so you're using, is this a Wix site?
Yes.
So you basically just find a site that lets you, basically create your own knowledge base. This is great.
Yes. And then we have a site for faculty to, this is great for new faculty that are getting acclimated to who we are, like our team. And I have a VoiceThread that it's kind of our directory. It introduces each one of our instructors and our staff and everybody, and it gives them their email address and their phone number so they can access that information pretty quickly. And then we have like our history, communication standards, Populi resources, just virtual presence. How do you establish virtual presence in your course? all that type of stuff in that section. And then we have a technology support, and it articulates all the technologies that we use consistently. And I have tutorials and videos for the people who might need to use that.
Okay. Now, do you have a way for people to contact if a student has a question? How do you have them? Do they contact you through this?
We used to have an email, I don't know, add-on, I guess you would call it, that they could email me, but I usually just have our contact information and then they just email us. So they just go into Outlook and email us using that information. Yep. So we have our support and library site always in the info tab for our students. And then we have the book list. This is where we house documents that they need throughout the whole year or whole semester. So we have specific articles and links that they will use in specific lessons. But then there's things that they might use in multiple lessons. And instead of putting documents in every single one of the lessons, we put it here. And the reason why we do that is to help me maintain the course, because there's a lot of times I need to go in and update those documents for staff and faculty. I'm really nice. And I update a lot of their stuff for them because that helps me make sure that I can check my accessibility. I can check and make sure it's consistent. And they're busy, so I just take it for them. And so if we put it all in one location and just have all of our instructions in the info tab, then I know to get to those instructions to update them, it's all here. We also have our syllabus and our activities checklist in this location. And I figured out in Populi, if I put a dash at the beginning of the title, then it pushes it up to the top, because automatically our brain thinks if it's at the top of the list, it's most important. Well, what's the most important document in the course? It's going to be pretty much the syllabus. Yeah. So we want that to be pushed up at the top. So just using those design features allows it to go to the top.
Okay, great.
The naming structure here is just extremely important, and I'll show you that in some of our lessons. It's really based in the Gestalt theory of perception. He's a 1920s psychologist, and really his theory talks about how our brain craves structure and how it automatically wants to group like items together. So we created a naming structure that allows that grouping to happen in Populi, so our brain doesn't have to work as hard, and it can conserve that brain energy to jumping into the content. So we use a prefix. Here you can see that we have instructions. This might not be the best course right now to show you because it's pretty simple. But you have instructions, and then we have a dash because it separates the prefix with the actual title. It allows our brains to comprehend that, and then it allows it to breathe, and then it jumps into the title of the document here. So in some courses, you can see that we have a whole lot of documents in here, and it automatically groups them. So in some of the courses, we have instructions, and then we have some resources here. And then we may have some workbooks here that they need to open. And you can see how it automatically groups things together and allows students to be more efficient because they can get to things a lot easier.
Absolutely.
Also, it helps with screen readers. I wonder if I have, I just did a presentation on this the other day.
Yeah, so talking about accessibility, that was going to come back to that at some point. But if you've got, well, I don't know if I want to, maybe we should finish the course and then come back and talk about accessibility.
Okay, and maybe I can pull up, I just did a presentation on Gestalt's theory and how it affects our naming structure. But with the screen reader, it's so helpful. And I'll pull that up and I'll show you, because it helps to visually see how that would be beneficial to people who need accessibility, have accessibility needs, and people who don't. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit, I guess.
Good, that's great.
All right, so we have our files section as well. And something our former director had done that I felt was extremely helpful. At the bottom of our syllabus, and this might be helpful to other people as well, we have a checklist, and it breaks down each week, and it talks about it lists the dates for that module, the theme, and then it lists all the readings and materials that they have to work through. And then also all of the assignments, because with Populi, we have the assignments tab, which is really helpful. But if we have discussions where they have initial post that's due on Wednesday and then a final post that's due on Sunday, it's really hard for them to know that there's due dates.
Gotcha.
So this helps articulate that a little bit better for them. Yep. And it allows them to check things off. So they can go in and you can see they have little boxes and they can go, okay, I've done it. Just helps them stay oriented, especially
Absolutely.
Kind of free thinkers that need that structure. And then the people who already like that structure, it's already there for them.
That's good. Yeah, that's really good.
So with the assignments tab, you can see that our naming protocol kind of extends to that. And you can really see how that helps our brains kind of organize the information here. You can visually see, because the prefix starts with the week that that assignment is due, you can see which weeks are heavier and which weeks are lighter, especially when we have a course that has multiple assignments in a week. You can really see, okay, this one has 2 assignments and this one has 4. So, or this one's a paper and this one's a discussion. So we have the week that it's due, we have a dash to separate that helps our brains. And then we have what that assignment is. Is it a discussion? Is it a paper? Is it a self-reflection? Is it a quiz? And that really helps our brains organize and assess very quickly. And then in the parentheses, we have the title of that particular discussion, which is helpful if you have 2 discussions in 1 week. You can differentiate between one discussion and the other.
Yeah, that's great. So you're looking at basically breaking it down by category so students know what to expect from a discussion as opposed to a paper or whatever other category they're looking at. Great.
Yes. And it's, even though we have these assignment groups, which is helpful when you're using a screen reader, it's really nice to have the information all right there. So instead of having your screen reader talk about the assignment groups and then move to the type and then to the name and then finally get to the due date, it already kind of has all that here. We're oriented. We know in week 1, the discussion is due, it's called this, and that just helps them get that information a lot more quickly instead of having to listen to everything. All they really have to listen to is that area right there.
Great.
So last year at this time, I just started implementing the electronic rubrics. We had a pilot. We had a pilot, I think, of 4 or 5 courses that were using the electronic rubrics, just so that we could get a feel of what works for us and what works for instructors before we put all of our courses in electronic rubrics. So we just wanted to get a feel of what works best. And so that was last year, and then all of our courses implemented electronic rubrics in January of this year.
Okay.
So again, too, we have a naming protocol, we have rubric, we have a dash, and then we have the title of the rubric. And then here are lessons. You can see a naming protocol is established here too with week 1, and then we have.
Can we look at? Sorry to interrupt. Can we look at one of your rubrics?
Yeah. I don't know.
Do you
if
take
really
part?
Special.
Well, I'm just So do you take part in creating these, or is this something that's done by more of the academics team?
It's a collaboration, really. Honestly, it's a collaboration. So when we start developing courses, they create the rubrics. Sometimes they ask me, do you just have a template and I can just kind of work on it? And that's really what most content experts ask for, is they just want what we normally use, and then they can detail it,
tweak it from there,
to tailor to how they want to grade, because you can grade very differently. You can have a very free-flowing rubric that may only have 2 or 3 categories, but it allows for the instructor to really kind of be broad in their grading. And then you have instructors that really want to break everything down, so they use it kind of more like a checklist. So it really depends on what the instructor prefers. And
now, do you use standard rubrics across your courses? Are instructors able to create their own rubrics? How does that work?
It's a mix. So we do have a template, and they're free to create it, or they can just create from scratch. And then they usually ask me, like, what do you think? And I usually go, okay, well, this one I think is going to take you a long time to grade. Like, there are ways you can structure your rubrics where it allows you to grade a little bit faster because you don't have to check everything. So, for example, when I first came on, some of the rubrics were counting how many spelling errors and how many grammar errors there are in a paper. Well,
Okay.
that takes a long time to count things.
Oh, yeah.
So if you kind of get a broad sense of, is this really bad, or is this okay, or is this really good? If you can break them down that way, when you're grading papers, it'll go much more quickly than counting things. And I think you'll have a lot less pushback from students too, going back, well, I only had 10 errors, not 11,
Yeah.
you know? So
Yeah, they start counting too, and then they want to argue about
exactly
how many errors there were.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
So I'll
Great.
give them feedback that way of, okay, I think this, you know, and sometimes you just don't know what it's going to feel like until it launches, and then you do it once or twice, and then you go, okay, this rubric's not working for me. It's too broad or too narrow. And then we can tweak it from there. So we give them a lot of academic freedom in terms of how they want their rubric, but I find that they come to me and ask me, what do you think works? Do you think this will work? What do you recommend?
Great.
Yeah, so for this one, this is a discussion. For our discussions, I usually recommend them being pretty broad because we implement a lot of discussions in our classes. And so it takes a long time to grade 20 people's discussions, especially if you're grading the initial response and replies separately. So this one's a little bit more simple than some of our papers that might have 7 or 8 different categories. And for a paper, that does make sense to do that.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. And I do recommend when they do create rubrics, especially for papers, if they have different sections. So some of our instructors give instructions to students for their paper, and they might say, here's section 1, I want you to cover this topic, section 2, cover this topic, section 3. And so I tend, if they ask me to create the rubric, sometimes they do, then I take their instructions and I model that. So one category will be section 1, one category will be section 2. And the hardest thing for me is to make sure that our instructions don't contradict what we're saying in our rubric. Okay. And it's really hard for me to make sure with instructors, like, if you change the instructions, that's fine. We've got to make sure it doesn't affect the rubric. Like, that change needs to be made in the rubric. Another thing that I've done recently this past year is I made sure to add the course learning outcome numbers to where we're grading it in the rubric. And this helps with accreditation. If they're asking us, how do you know your students are mastering your course learning outcomes? I can say, okay, well, let me pull out the rubrics. Yeah. This is where we're covering.
So because you mentioned, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned in your initial planning phase for designing a course, you're always starting working from the back or working backwards. So you start with the outcomes. So that's got to be at the forefront as you're working through the course. So I like that you tie each rubric or, you know, list the numbers, because that just allows you to make those connections. They're very clear. And when it comes time to put that information together for whatever, you know, review you're doing, it's all right there.
Absolutely. And it helps too, because when a course changes hands from one instructor to another and they start changing things, which is fine, it helps me make sure that all the course learning outcomes are being addressed thoroughly in every course, despite the changes that are being made.
Yep. Yeah, you don't want that course to get handed off and then there's just a disconnect in terms of one instructor not being able to pick up exactly where the other one left off. So yeah, that makes sense.
Right. Especially like if there's a paper that covers one outcome and it's really not measured at all through the whole term, but it's measured pretty heavily in that last week. Well, what if an instructor comes in and takes that paper out? Then that outcome's not measured. So we need to make sure that gets measured.
That's great.
So in our lessons, you can see that we start with the week that the module is going to take place. That helps our students be oriented, especially if, let's say, they finished week 4 and they need to come into week 5. They can find week 5 without having to remember which week 4 it was entitled. It also helps show them that everything is in order. There's no question that it's not in order. We also have 2 preliminary lessons here that we encourage them to complete before they start to do in week 1. There's no assignments or anything, usually in the course office or getting started, but it helps get them oriented and set for success. So our course office, it just introduces the instructor. Sometimes they have a video of themselves so that they can hear their pitch and their rate that they talk in. It just kind of helps humanize the course and helps them to take what they're hearing and implement it in the feedbacks, because that does change the tone of their feedback. So that's helpful. And then just response times. A lot of our quality matters standards, which is the industry standard for online courses, are implemented in the course office and the getting started lesson. So these are two very important lessons that includes a lot of those standards.
Yeah. Now I like this because you're setting the expectation right at the beginning, helps students know what to expect, where to get what they need to get, and how to be successful in the course. I think that's good.
Right. And we also have a form that is in all of our course offices that's called Questions for the Instructor. And this is where they ask the instructor, it's kind of the equivalent of raising their hand in class. So if they have a question about an assignment or if something's not working in the class, then they comment in that forum. All the instructors are subscribed to that forum, so they get notifications and they can assist that student pretty quickly.
Awesome.
Then we have a getting started lesson. So it just talks about the purpose and the structure of the course. Is it in 2-week modules? Is it week by week structure? Talks about our naming protocol and it kind of explains all of that and what all that means. And then it tells them how to get started. Like what do they need to do before they start? And we do open our courses 1 week before the course starts. This really does help our students that might have accessibility needs, so they can go in. A lot of our students like to print everything off. So this helps students who have dyslexia or ADD. My daughter has dyslexia and ADD, so do I. And if I give her an iPad with her favorite book on it, she's like, I can't do it. We got to go to the library and get it. I got to have it in my hands. I got to have that paper format. I'm very much the same way too. I'm a lot more focused if I have it in my hands. And so a lot of our students I have found they like to print everything off, put it in a binder. So that allows them time to be able to do that.
Great.
And then we have our lessons. So here's week 1 of one of our courses. This is our lifespan course. In every one of our lessons, we have at least 2 pages. We have an overview page and a lesson page. And the overview page, it just kind of describes what they're going to be doing that week. It might give them heads up if there's if it's a pretty heavy workload, if there's a lot of reading or a couple of assignments, it might give them a heads up, hey, just prepare and make sure you allow that time to do that. And then it lists the course learning outcomes that we're going to measure them in, and then the learning objective that is tied to the outcomes. And you can see here, we only have one course learning outcome that we're going to measure their learning in. And so that's also noted in the objective, because sometimes if you have 2 or 3 outcomes and you have 2 or 3 objectives, then you don't know which outcomes being covered by which objective. And sometimes there are 3 outcomes that are being measured by 1 objective. So I like to articulate that out so we know what's being covered and when it's being covered. That also helps when instructors start modifying their classes to make sure that all those outcomes are being measured.
That's great.
So then we have a lesson here. For accessibility reasons, I've established a hierarchy. I don't normally use the, I think it's the title feature that you have in the design tab of Populi. I usually go in and do the computer code and do like an H1, H2, H3 heading that allows the screen reader to kind of get more of a detailed picture of how the hierarchy is. We always start with lesson because that's the name of the page, and that's a heading 1. Topic headings are always heading 2, and assignment headings are always heading 3. So that also helps our students identify when there's an assignment, especially if they're using a screen reader, because it'll read it out to them, heading 3, and then they know, oh, that's an assignment. Okay. So we have a topic heading. We have noted all our readings with the word read. It's just short for reading. It's a required reading. We have, in parentheses, we have the lead author's name in parentheses, and then we have the rest, the actual chapter, the actual title of the article. I know I have some instructors that like to be creative in terms of let's rename this, and I'm kind of mean. I'm like, no, we have to keep it the same. No, we have to keep it the same. It drives me crazy. So the reason why we do this too is instead of putting like all of the authors in the parentheses, sometimes you can have 5 or 6 authors, and if it's off to the right hand side, let's say it's a file or a link, then you can't see the title of the article. All you see is authors because there's just not enough room. So we just restrict it to the lead author. Also, since we're so narrow in scope, we only deal with addiction studies. A lot of our articles feel like they have very similar titles because they use the same keywords in them. And so to differentiate between one article and the other, we use the lead author, and that helps differentiate between them.
Yeah, makes sense.
And so for readings that are not uploaded, I always put it in a bullet point to help it stand out from the content, and so it just doesn't get meshed in. It also helps people to be able to skim and find what they have to read and make sure that they have read everything that they have to read. And then in this particular lesson, this is a really short lesson. So in this particular lesson, we have the discussion prompt here. It also matches exactly the discussion prompt in the forum itself. That helps students to kind of prepare and see that without having to get into it. That way, when they're reading, they can kind of look at what they need to pay attention for in order to form their post the way they want to. Then we also have remember items. This helps identify which what things are assignments for students. So all of our assignments in our lesson has a remember items. It just is a bullet list of just telling them, make sure you check the activities checklist for the exact due date, or the assignments tab for the exact due date. Make sure you check the instructions document in the info tab so you know you've covered everything. Make sure you've looked at the rubric in the assignment submission area of that assignment, yep. And then post wherever or submit wherever. So it articulates that for them. But this also just gives them a visual cue of, oh, this is an assignment.
Yeah, good.
And then sometimes we have a page that's called Looking Ahead. And it's not in every course and it's not in every lesson, but it just kind of helps students know that there's something big coming up. Okay. So if we are using a technology like VoiceThread and we are afraid that they may not have used VoiceThread enough to be confident in it, then we say, hey, you have a project in week 6 that uses VoiceThread. Here's a tutorial about VoiceThread. Here is the instructional designer, educational technologist contact information. Contact her if you want a tutorial on it. Just be prepared. So that gives them a few weeks to really get familiar with that, because you don't want them to get to week 6 and go, oh my gosh, I got to learn a new technology and I've got to learn all this content to be able to do what I need to do. So we have looking ahead pages that kind of give them a heads up.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, great.
All right, so then our discussion tab, all our discussions are linked to our lesson. I love that feature in Populi. We also, they're located here as well. And to organize it, we start with the week that it's due, or that it's, usually if it's assigned in that week, it's going to be due at the end of that week. So the week that it's due, and then we follow the naming protocol. And you can see just kind of helps students find the discussions quickly and easily. It helps them navigate it faster. And if you imagine using a screen reader, if you're trying to get down to theories of development, then you have to listen to each one of these entire title before you get down to theories of development. But if you know it's in week 2, then all you have to do is listen to the prefix and then just navigate down until you hear the correct prefix, and then you know you're opening the right one.
Yeah, that's great. I love the naming structure.
We don't have any tests in this class, but I can always show you one that does have tests.
Sure, no, that's great.
Look at that. And I can also show you, this course has been simplified quite a bit, and then we have courses that are very complex, and I can also show you some of those lessons because they embed a lot of material. Okay. In fact, I might show you that because it helps.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. Yeah, when you get like a really complex, there's a lot going on. It might be interesting to see that.
Let me just show you quickly so you can just see that, since we just talked about lessons. So this is our research course. So here's the overview page.
Okay.
And then here's our lesson page. You can see everything kind of looks very similar. This instructor had created a video, which is great. I really encourage that, to implement the video. It has lots of different benefits to it. And then you can see here, oh, she has an introduction discussion right off of the bat, because when you walk in class, you want to know who you're dealing with. So we have an introduction discussion, and that's pretty standard for all of our classes, but the first lesson has a discussion that allows people to introduce themselves. Okay. And then she has a pre-test. You can tell that this has a remembered list, so it is something they need to accomplish. And then we have a different subject matter, or different topic, different topic, different topic, different topic. And then you can see that we have embedded some videos and some images here. Again, I always put the link above the video. I love the embedded version, but also to have the linked version above it allows students to know the title of that video. And that's helpful, because if they're going back to look for different videos, they know exactly what the name is. Also, too, sometimes some functions are not available when it's embedded that way. So if you click on the actual link, that allows them to have more functions if they need it. So I found that true for closed captioning too sometimes. So I always put that link there. And then for images, I always create an image name too, so they know if the instructor refers to a specific image, they can use the image name and they know which image they're talking about. Okay. We also have a description underneath it that describes the figure, so that that's for accessibility reasons too. So people who are using a screen reader know exactly what people who have visual capabilities are seeing. And as you can see, there's a lot of visuals in here. That's good. Which is very helpful. So you just looked at our probably most simple class, and now we're looking at our most complex. So most of ours fall in between that, but you can kind of see how this has. And I recently learned how to make these images smaller. Like if I put them in PowerPoint, and then I can shrink the size. Resize it and then put it in so they're smaller. So that's something I'm currently working on as well, so that they can kind of see more content and not have to scroll to see a huge big picture. And then you can see here we have some readings that are linked. You know that they're required readings because of the prefix beforehand. Some of ours are optional readings, and we put optional here instead of reading. So students are educated on what it means when it says optional, what it means when it says reading. Again, we have a prefix here for the video. We named the video. We have a knowledge check, which is similar to a quiz, but they're not graded on it, but it helps them to know how they're understanding the information, which is really important for something complex. That's a test? It is a test, but it's not graded. Okay. So yeah, that's good. It's worth 0 points, but it's automatically graded so they can see what they're getting right and what they're getting wrong. Absolutely. It's kind of a self-assessment for them. Yeah, that's good. And then we have another discussion. So this lesson's pretty heavy. The other lessons are not as heavy, I think, than week one, but this is a pretty fast-paced course. It's research. It's not easy, but you can see here how the documents look nice and neat and organized when they have a naming structure to it. And you know exactly what you're getting into, especially if you have a lot of links in the course, and you might have articles, you might have videos, you might have images. So to have them labeled with the prefix allows us to know exactly what we're looking for. And then for our files, we have images and charts and readings. That's great. And so do you mentioned you use WebEx. Do you do any live video in your courses? We have 2 courses that do WebExes. We don't implement them too much in our online courses because most of our students, well, when you're an online student, usually it's really hard to have a structured time. Absolutely. You are working in your courses when you can get to it. You're either taking care of young children or older parents, or you are working outside the home. And so you need to fit your learning in where you can. So it's really hard to have like a set time. So we have 2 courses where we say, hey, you have set WebExes in these courses. So make sure that you're prepared for that before you take it. And we don't implement them in a lot of our other courses because we want that flexibility there for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've got schools that'll use, they'll either use Big Blue Button, which is currently integrated into Populi. They'll use Zoom, which we're actually looking at getting that. Populi has the conferences section, and we're trying to set that up so that you can use, you know, a Big Blue Button or Zoom, or basically use that to have the live video. It also records it, so if you're not able to participate during the actual, you know, recorded or scheduled event, then you can catch it later on the recorded version. So I know we have some schools that are starting to use that. I'm hoping to push that more and more, just because I know that one of the challenges that instructors have is just having the capability to actually record a lecture and to know how to do it in the right format, and then to know how to upload that and not have it be like 10 gigabytes long. And so, you know, doing that sort of live video capture can be really helpful. So I know we're pushing in that direction more.
So with the Big Blue Button, is that synchronous or asynchronous? Is it more asynchronous where it's like just creating a video lecture and then implement?
Just like WebEx, it's going to record it at that time. And like I said, a lot of people are using Zoom for that currently. We're looking at getting Zoom into Populi as well. So you could either use Zoom or Big Blue Button. But yeah, the idea is that it just takes out the dynamic of the instructor doesn't have to think about the fact that they're recording a video. All they have to do is launch it, give the presentation, and then it records it all for them and makes it available for people who were not present, you know, at that time.
Could you do it when nobody's present? Can you just do it as a lecture? Because that's something that if I'm pushing people to do recordings, I need it to be easy, because that's kind of, I think a lot of people are apprehensive because they're afraid, do I have to upload it to Vimeo and then do the link and then can I do it off my phone? And so I need to make it as simple as possible. And I had considered Big Blue Button because I heard from other users of Populi that that's something they've been using. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe that's something we need to start thinking about. We currently use, some of our more advanced instructors use Camtasia to record lectures.
Oh yeah, I've used that.
And that's what I primarily use, but there's a big learning curve to that. We also use VoiceThread. A lot of our adjuncts use VoiceThread to do their lectures. And then I've also encouraged people, just take your mobile phone and create video and upload it, which the uploading process, you know, can kind of be tricky for some people. But I feel like that's helpful because you can take it on the go and you can really show people, what do you do? Because we have people that live on the West Coast and they just go and they hang out at the beach and they're like, hello, everybody. And
that's great.
Yeah, it really shows their personality. So you can't do that with a laptop as well as you can with your phone. So
yeah, it's really true. Doing it on your phone I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
All right, so we don't use the calendar function as much as we use our activities checklist because it's just more detailed and it's a one-stop shop in the syllabus. So we don't use the calendars as much as some schools do. And then of course we have the roster list, the grade book, attendance, and all that. So those are supplementary for us.
And do you use the Populi can track course participation for attendance? Do you use that at all, or are you mostly doing do you have the instructor go through and just indicate, okay, this person did what they needed to do, so we're going to count that as attendance?
It depends. Since I'm not teaching any courses for Hazelden, I just let the instructors do what works for you, what makes you most efficient and effective. So they do know that function. Because of financial aid reasons, we need to make sure that it is academic, that if they're present in the course, it's not just opening up a lesson, they need to be submitting something and showing that they've done academic stuff. So because we have discussions in almost every week, usually they pull up discussion and make sure they've participated. If they participated, then they count them as present, or if they've submitted assignment. I think that's usually how instructors do that.
Yeah, great. That's great. And so for course review, you mentioned that kind of the third step, is that something, you mentioned doing that before the course actually starts.
We actually do it every term.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want to see that?
Well, I'm interested to know how are you evaluating, okay, how are we doing? Is this successful? Are there things that we need to tweak? I'm sure that's a huge question, but
Yeah, and we do lots of different evaluations. So in some of our newer courses, or if we have instructors that just need a little bit more feedback, we do put like a mid-semester evaluation through Survey Gizmo in our, like in week 6 of our courses.
gotcha.
That helps us just evaluate where the strengths and weaknesses of that instructor to help them with that. We also do an end of the term evaluation as well through Populi.
Okay.
To evaluate all of our instructors. So we evaluate instructors that way to evaluate the readiness of our courses. Then this is the checklist that we do. And there are times where I'm like, I really want to know if this design is working for students, like what is working, what is not. And sometimes that does come out in those mid-semester evaluations or the end of term evaluations where they say the discussions did not work for me, or the tests were too much, or we really like the WebExes, and they give feedback that way that helps us figure out what works for our design. But before we launch a course, we do a really heavy course development and QM review. QM is short for Quality Matters. So we don't typically do a full Quality Matters rubric. Are you familiar with Quality Matters, or should I talk about that a little bit?
No, that'd be great. Yeah.
Okay, so Quality Matters is the industry standard of what should be included in online courses. They have they have all these standards that need to be included in your online course, and then they have a method that you use where you have 3 reviewers. They each review the course separately to make sure these standards are included and to what degree they're included, and they also take note of any evidence of when those standards are included. So it's pretty hefty. Then you compare all 3 to make sure that the standards are at a level 3 the majority of the time, 2 out of 3 times. So that those are noted. So it's pretty hefty. So we don't do the 3 reviewer deal because it is just too much for our small organization. And you have to have that specific qualification that you are a certified reviewer to do it. And so we just don't do that. So what we do is I took the standards from the Quality Matters rubric, and then I put them in our checklist to make sure that it's there. I also make sure that I note the evidence of when you would find that in that course.
Okay.
And there's the standards. If it's a level 3, you must have it. I have these color coded because that's how I work. And then we have level 2, which is blue. It's good to have, and level 1 is purple. It's nice to have. So that also helps us assess our course and go, okay, is there a standard like across the board that we're really weak in that I have noted it's not included in a course substantially? So one that has come up a lot is closed captioning. So that's why I've dove into that this year, is making sure we get our videos closed captioned. It's those type of things. I also, when I do review these, if it's something I can correct, then, for example, if our documents are not accessible with a screen reader, that's something I can correct right then without having to talk to the instructor. Then I do it to be able to say, okay, it's checked off, we've done it, here's the date. So we have broken down all the standards into where you would find them in Populi, because we have a standard template, so we know where all these things should be in a course. Right. That's also the benefit of having a standard template. Great. And so we know where what we need to review, where is it located, what do we need to review, and then who reviews it. So for me, instructional designer, and then the instructor. And what I do, again, I'm nice to our instructors, I highlight in yellow what areas they need to review, because it deals with content. I don't know the content as well as they do, or at all, and so that they can review that area, and I can do the technical stuff. I can make sure the links work, I can make sure the dates are correct, I can do other things. And there are some areas, like making sure the dates are correct in the assignments tab, that needs both pairs of eyes on it. So if it's grayed out, they don't need to worry about it. If it's yellow, they do need to worry about it. All the white things I worry about. And it's also a place for us, if I find something that I need them to take care of, I take note of it here. And when I pass them back the review to complete their end, they can read those notes, they can leave me notes and pass it back to me. So you can just see that we have all these things we like to check. Is everything standardized? Is everything there? And it really helps to ensure that our template is being
Absolutely.
used correctly. That may take things out if necessary. So just make sure that our template is still consistent. And then you can see here, we've noted when the quality matter standard is being used. We also have it color coded so I know if it's really, really important or not so important. And then I put the evidence here of where it is in the course. And usually if this text is in red, that means it's not up to par and I need to come back to it later.
Okay.
And then I compile all of this. I know which courses are lax on some standards, and then that helps me think globally. How can we correct this globally without having to get the instructors involved? Like, what can I do on my end? Can I input something in the Getting Started lesson in all of our courses to satisfy the standard without having to get them involved? So
great.
You can see it's pretty hefty. So we only do this course review when the course is just developed, sometimes after the first time it's been launched, just because it kind of helps us to shore things up, because there's sometimes changes are made during the course. Or if a course has been substantially changed, we might do this, or completely redeveloped, we will do this. Now, in all our other courses, every term, we do a small condensed version of this. This only checks things that are can change. So things that are dynamic, such as web links, those change. Assignment due dates, those change. This also confirms when the instructor had added themselves to the Questions for Instructor forum to make sure that they are subscribed to that and are getting email notifications. So all these things, and this is just, it's a small one, you can see that. And there's only like 3 or 4 or 5 areas that the instructor needs to worry about, and I just take care of all the rest.
Yeah, that's great.
So this just ensures everything's working, because once a student gets in that course, if things aren't working, they start panicking, and that's the last thing you want.
No, this is good. Yeah, it's detailed, but you really have to be detailed if you want to have everything checked. You want to make sure everything's good to go. So that's really, really helpful.
And honestly, once you have a really great structure to your courses and your courses have all the kinks worked out after a couple times it's been launched, these reviews go fairly quickly. Maybe not the condensed review, that's pretty hefty, but the condensed review is really light, but the QM review is pretty hefty. This would not take me long at all to do. And so then I pass it to the instructor, and it doesn't take them long to do either. So once you get all the kinks worked out and you're used to doing this, then it just doesn't take long.
Great, that's helpful. I was going to ask you about proctoring. Do you use proctors when students are taking tests? Is that something in the faculty domain that you're not involved with, or how does that work?
So we used to. We used to use Smarter Proctoring. We used to have a contract with them. And we mainly used it for our comprehensive exam. So at the end of our program, our students had to do a comprehensive exam. And that's when we really needed to have a proctor, because it's such a big, hefty deal. But we have phased out the comprehensive exam. Instead, they do a project that they do in pieces in every single one of the courses, and then they do a big defense of the accumulation of that project. So now they don't really need to have a proctor. Gotcha. Our tests, I'd say right now, all of our instructors do not use a proctor for their tests. They just don't. We do have strict academic policies that students need to adhere by. They know that there's big consequences if we do find out that they are cheating on the exams. So
but you've got other ways of measuring, if someone's trying to skate through, they're not going to be able to do the defense of their project.
Exactly.
That's what it sounds like. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a pretty big deal. It's almost, it's not as big of a deal as defending your dissertation, but
Yeah.
it's kind of it's a smaller one. So if you think of a master's version of that's what it is. So they
Yeah.
meet via WebEx if they're online. If they're on ground, they actually come in to the panel and they do defend it. They are asked questions about, they're given a scenario, they are asked about what would you use to treat this patient and why. So they have to think on their feet, but it does pull back from all the pieces that they've done through the course.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, let's look. Can we look at you've talked a lot about accessibility along the way, because it's, you obviously clearly are thinking about that at every step as you're designing the course and standardizing the naming of things. How do you then, do you have a reader that you use that you actually look at the course and then evaluate?
Yes.
Is that something you can show us?
I've never done it on this computer that I'm working on. I usually use my Mac.
You just describe what that is for us, so that I think some people probably have never actually used a screen reader. So
in fact, I have spoken at a university 3 times this month, and I always ask them, have you ever heard of a screen reader? And there's only like 2 hands in the whole room that have ever heard of it, and no one's ever used it. I'm like, okay. It's so important because you can be drugged through a legal situation pretty easily if your courses are not accessible.
Yep.
So that's something we have really focused on. So what a screen reader is, it's software on your computer that reads aloud everything that you would see visually. So it describes images. If you have text in the computer code that tells what the image is, it doesn't know it right off the bat, you have to tell them what it is. It reads any tabs. And what the user does is they use the arrows on their keyboard to navigate from one element to the next on the screen. So if you can imagine, on a website, you have the main menu, your screen reader reads the first option, and then they can tab over to the next one, and it reads the next option, and they get to the option that they need, and they push enter, and they enter that website. So what I do is I use my Mac. Most computers have some kind of screen reader built in them, and it's just a software you can activate, or you can find, I think maybe in the settings of your computer, and you can activate it and it'll just read everything aloud.
Yeah.
And what I've done,
I think the iPhone even there's an accessibility mode that you can turn on. So if you're logged in, and I've messed with that a little bit. But yeah, that's great.
Our Apple TV does, and I don't know how my kids turn it on, but they turn it on, and they're like, turn it off, turn accessibility off.
It starts reading everything.
Everything to them, and it drives them crazy. They're like, I just want the Disney Channel. So Apple products are really great at making things accessible, and I prefer using the screen reader on my Mac than I do on the Dell. It's just easier for me to use. And so what I did was, I had never used a screen reader before this whole process of making things accessible. I was like, I really need to use it so I know how it functions, because that's gonna be implications on my design. So so what I did is I pulled up all our courses, and I used the screen reader to check to see how accessible our courses are, to get a feel of how I can make them accessible. That's when I determined we need to have a hierarchy. That's when I determined that the naming protocol that I already started developing works really well with the screen reader. And so I'm like, oh, this is genius. Great. So, good. So I checked all of our courses, and that's when I realized that Populi is really accessible and friendly to a screen reader, which made me thrilled, because some of our other technologies that we have had or have used and were not accessible. And then we had to rethink, okay, do we need to use something else, or will we be making this accessible?
There are design standards that we follow in the way that we develop, and so we're always following that. And it's not immediately obvious that we're designing for accessibility, but when you actually start to use a screen reader and you realize, oh, okay, that works pretty well.
Exactly. And I think a lot of our instructors don't realize how our design really does help accessibility. So there's some things like, why do we need this? And so I tell them, I'm like, oh, I had no clue. You just thought it made it look pretty. I'm like, oh no, there's this function behind it. And then I also use the screen reader to check our support site, because that is open to all of our students. And actually even though we don't share it, is people can get to it. So we needed to make sure that was accessible too. And also make sure all our documents are accessible with a hierarchy, making sure all of our images have an alternative text to it. Just make sure everything is accessible. So what I learned from using the screen reader is that it functions differently depending on what it's being used for. So it functions very differently for me when I am reading something off of Word versus using it to navigate a website, because there's just different things you just use it differently. You don't push enter a whole lot when you're reading a Word document or an article, but on a website, you're navigating to different elements, and then you push enter to activate that element. So it's just, the screen reader can be used just a little bit differently. So again, I thought, well, that's important that our naming protocol tells them when they are entering a website, so they can prepare mentally of, okay, this is going to function a little bit differently, instead of going, okay, I know this is a link, but I have no clue what I'm opening.
Yeah, right.
So,
Absolutely.
So it kind of gives the screen reader, allows the screen reader to give the listener a heads up to what they are opening.
Okay. Yeah, that's really helpful. Well, this has been great. I'm trying to think. I know we've talked about a lot. I might have to actually have you back on at some point to talk about some more of these things in detail, but I don't want to keep you any longer today. So yeah, this has been really helpful. And just thank you for sharing what you all are up to. And looks like you guys are doing a great job.
Thank you. Thank you. I just brag all the time about Populi support and how just quick you guys are to help us out. And so it's always a pleasure to work with you guys. So
we appreciate that.
We're thankful for all that.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, thank you very much, Ginger. We'll talk again soon.
All right. Thank you.